Hi there, naturalist Leisha Johnson here with the North Lakeland Discovery Center in our Discover at Home series. Today we are going to be exploring a really unique and special place, an interesting habitat, an old growth forest. And I am here at the Van Vliet Hemlock State Natural Area Old Growth Forest located in Presque Isle. This is a very unique piece of property as there's only 0.2% of old growth forest left in the state of Wisconsin. So it's very rare and unique to have this type of habitat around us, and we're very lucky to have this so close to the Discovery Center. Now this forest is about a little over 400 acres and has a wonderful friends group, the Friends of Van Vliet, that worked really hard to get this to become a state natural area and to be protected in 2013. There are some really great trails that are maintained out here, very minimally. They're very narrow trails, so they're not big and wide or anything like that. So it's a beautiful place to come and explore. But I'm going to take you around and show you some of the unique characteristics of an old growth forest, what makes an old growth forest different from other forests. So let's get going on a little hike and see what we can find. So the Van Vliet Hemlock State Natural Area is considered a hemlock hardwood forest. What that means is that it's dominated by, of course, hemlock trees, but the hardwoods that you'll find here are sugar maple, yellow birch, and some basswood as well. Those are kind of the dominant features here in trees. And so what else is unique about this property and what makes the trees and the plant growth that's here so diverse is that it actually sits on a moraine from a glacier. So this is kind of the terminal moraine. It's called the Weiniger Moraine. And as these glaciers stopped in the area and then started to retreat, they left behind all the sediment that they had been pushing down as they retreated across the state. And as they melted and kind of reversed location, they left all this debris and rocks and soils behind in these kind of big hummocky type of a topography. And so we'll look at different type of topography as well in here, but just want to give you an idea of what this looks like up here, where you'll see these a lot of great hills and dips and hills and dips. It kind of just keeps going, but it's really kind of a cool forest too, because down here where I'm pointing is a pretty kind of a dark, it's almost all hemlock down in there where the trail comes out. As the trail comes up this way, it kind of opens up into this pretty dominated by hardwood little section of the trail. So as you go on this trail, you kind of go through these different habitats, which is really unique, but also there's a lot of hills, which makes it a lot of fun to hike in. Now, just because a forest has a few old trees, maybe 150, 200 years old, that doesn't really make it an old growth forest. There are several different characteristics of old growth forests that allow us to put them into this category. One of those important characteristics is that there's very minimal use by humans on the property. There's very little, history of human use, tree cutting on the property. And in this forest, this was logged out a couple times, but it's been quite some time since it has been logged. One of the remnants of that time was this big old yellow birch. You can see here, it's actually still alive. It's probably, who knows, maybe 150, 200 years old. They can live up to be 300 years old or more. But you can kind of see that there is a bit of a cut in the base of this tree, as if they started to cut it down and then for whatever reason stopped. So there was a little bit of a history of logging in this property, very minimal, and that is definitely one of the characteristics of an old growth forest. Another characteristic of old growth forests is that there's a lot of dead and down trees, and pretty much all from natural causes. There hasn't been logging here in a long time, so a lot of these trees have just fallen naturally. There was actually a storm here a couple years ago that took down a couple of huge hemlocks in this forest. So this is one of the other characteristics of these trees, and these trees serve a very important role. Now, just because a tree has fallen over in a forest doesn't mean that it's done contributing to the health of that forest. When these trees fall down, they become maybe even more important than they were before. They live what we call a second life as a nurse log. Nurse logs are dead trees that have fallen down in a forest and are starting to decompose. Now they say that as old as the tree was living, that's maybe as many years as it takes for it to decompose. So this is a pretty good sized hemlock, and it might take a couple hundred years for this log to completely decompose back into soil. But as a nurse log, it's really serving a wonderful purpose here. What that means is that it's a perfect place for other trees, other plants, ferns, things like that to start growing. You can see here on this old hemlock. We've got a little cedar tree growing. There's little tiny hemlock growing here. And then there's a whole row of little baby hemlocks growing all on the top of this tree. Now when a tree falls down and is laying here, it actually is the perfect place for new growth. A seed will fall on this log. And what it does is when it falls, of course, it leaves a nice opening up in the canopy. So in an old growth forest, it tends to be kind of dense and dark on the underground. And so this opens up so there's wonderful sunlight. This nurse log also kind of holds moisture every time it rains, so there's a lot of water in there and a lot of nutrients as well as that tree is starting to decompose. So all these combinations really, it makes a wonderful place for these new plants and trees to start to grow. And sometimes if you're walking in an old forest and you see a bunch of trees in a straight line, it might not be because someone else, a human, actually did it. It might be because they were all growing in a nurse log similar to this situation here. Now, not only can we have nurse logs, we can also have nurse stumps. You can see here, that is kind of a remnant of an old, rotting, decomposing stump. But what's really cool is kind of what's happening over here. This is a young yellow birch tree, and by young, it could be like 50 years old. But what's interesting is that when trees start to grow over these nurse logs and nurse stumps, as those stumps and logs tend to completely decompose away, these other new growing trees might have complete root systems that are already intact and kind of growing around that stump. And when that stump decomposes and disappears, well, it looks like these trees now have legs and are ready to run around the forest. Just another cool, unique aspect of these nurse logs. Another characteristic of an old growth forest is the pit and mound topography that we find here. And what that refers to is the very uneven landscape, very uneven topography of this area. It's not real flat, but what we're going to find is kind of hard to see in a video, but as these trees are tipping over, of course, their root systems are popping up, and those root systems and the corresponding dirt are kind of up in the air, and then where they kind of came out of the ground, there's this pit left. And so over time, these mounds that we see in these corresponding pits are where trees once tipped over, and we'll see that all over the forest. Back in here, there's a really great mound. I bet there's a pit right behind it there. So this topography is not flat in this old growth forest. It's just characterized by these bumps and dips and little tiny holes. It's pretty awesome. Within these unique geologic landscape here found at the Van Vliet Hemlocks, with these dips that were left behind by the glaciers, we have these ephemeral ponds, or vernal pools, some folks call them. They are temporary ponds that show up in the spring. They are filled in by melting snow and early spring rain, and these are really important because this is where our woodland frogs, like the wood frog and the spring peepers, come, and all of our salamanders come to lay eggs. Now, they do this because these ponds are in the forest and that's where they live, but also because there's no predators in here. There's no crayfish, there's no fish in here to eat those eggs. Over time, these ponds will dry up later in the summer, making them just temporary. Which is what the word ephemeral means. It's just temporary. So really unique and important part of these forests. A final characteristic of our old growth forest are what we call snags. These are kind of dead standing trees, and they say that over 80 different species of birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians will use these trees at some point when they first start to die until they actually fall over. Behind me here you can see a beautiful snag just kind of standing in this forest, living another life here. At the very top you can kind of see that hole, and there was actually a porcupine that lived in here a number of years ago. So they're great habitat for owls like to nest in here. As you know, owls do not make their own nests. Also important for bats, which you know I love bats. So yeah, just one other characteristic of an old growth forest is just a bunch of dead trees left to stand and provide that wonderful service to wildlife. Thank you so much for joining me today as we explored this beautiful old growth forest. Of course, there was so much more to share of this really amazing, unique, and important landscape and habitat. all those different characteristics. It really is a cool place to visit. So hopefully you get out to visit one of these places soon. If you'd like more information on the Van Vliet hemlocks, you can visit the Discovery Center's website, discoverycenter.net. You will find information on this forest and the trails, a little bit more about the history of this property as well on that site, along with information on how to become a member of the Discovery Center, donate, or sign up for programs as a nonprofit. We appreciate support any way that you can help us out to share the love of this natural world and share our passions with you. Stick around, I'll add on to this video a few photos and some sounds that I heard while I was out here. Lots of wonderful signs of spring happening. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.